The bank teller slid the printout across the counter and asked if I wanted a second copy. I said no. I already knew I'd be reading it more than once. $41,000. Gone from the business account in 4 transfers over 6 weeks. Not stolen in the dramatic sense. No broken locks, no forged signature, just moved, quietly, by someone who had my login because I'd given it to him myself 3 years earlier, when I was recovering from surgery and needed help keeping the shop running. My nephew Caleb. I stood in that bank lobby with fluorescent light humming overhead and the smell of stale coffee from the customer service desk, and I did not say a word. I folded the printout in half, then in half again, and put it in my jacket pocket like it was nothing, like it was a grocery list. Because here's the thing about me. I don't react in the moment. I never have. 34 years running a precision machine shop taught me that the man who reacts first usually loses the negotiation. And whatever this was, it was about to become a negotiation. My name is Walter Reyes. I'm 61 years old. I own Reyes Precision Tooling in Fort Wayne, Indiana. A shop I built from a 2-bay garage into a 40-employee operation that makes parts for aerospace subcontractors. I didn't inherit a dime of it. I financed the first lathe with a loan against my truck. And I know how that sounds, the hard-working man, the ungrateful family. But bear with me, because this part matters more than you'd think. I raised my sister's son after she passed when Caleb was 14. Never had kids of my own. My wife Donna and I just folded him into our lives like he'd always been there. His cleats by the back door, his loud music through the wall, his college applications spread across our kitchen table while Donna made him practice interview answers out loud. When he graduated business school, I didn't just give him a job. I gave him a title, operations manager, age 26, salary that took most men in this town 15 years to reach. I taught him the vendor relationships I'd spent 2 decades building. I taught him how to read a P&L statement like a doctor reads an X-ray. I put his name on paperwork I probably shouldn't have. Donna used to say I loved that boy like he was made of glass, careful, proud, a little too soft where he was concerned. She wasn't wrong. For 6 years, Caleb ran the daily operations while I focused on client relationships and expansion. He was good at it, genuinely good. That's what made this so hard to sit with. Not the money, but the fact that the money had been moved by someone who didn't need to steal it. All he had to do was ask. I want you to understand what trust looked like in that shop before any of this happened, because it makes the ending land the way it should. Caleb had keys to every door, including the one to my office, which nobody else touched. He had signing authority up to $50,000 without needing my approval, a privilege I extended after his 3rd year, once I was certain he understood what the business meant to me. When our biggest client, a subcontractor out of Cincinnati named Halbrook Aerospace, threatened to walk over a late shipment, it was Caleb who flew out on a Sunday, ate crow in their conference room, and saved a contract worth $1.2 million a year. I paid for his wedding. Not helped with it, paid for the whole thing, 68 guests at the Hilton downtown, because his mother wasn't there to do it, and I figured that job had fallen to me the day I signed his adoption of our last name onto nothing but a handshake and a promise I made at her funeral. When his wife Priya got pregnant with their first, I set up a college fund, before the baby had a name, $25,000, opened the same week they told us. I remember Donna crying at the kitchen table, reading the paperwork, saying this family finally had something worth protecting. That's the phrase that stuck with me later, something worth protecting. I just didn't expect I'd need to protect it from the person I built it for. There's a particular kind of trust that develops after you've watched someone grow up. You stop auditing them. You stop asking follow-up questions. When Caleb told me cash flow was tight because of the new equipment financing, I believed him, because why wouldn't I? He'd never once given me a reason to check. That's what made the discovery land like a gut punch delivered in absolute silence. Not because the amount was catastrophic. $41,000 wouldn't sink my company. It was the math underneath it. 6 years of unquestioned access, and this is what he chose to do with it. It started small, the way these things always do. Our bookkeeper, Marlene, mentioned in passing that the equipment lease we'd supposedly signed with a company called Ferris Industrial Solutions didn't match anything in her filing system. She wasn't suspicious, she was just tidy, the kind of person who notices when a folder is 1 document short. I told her I'd handle it. I always told her I'd handle things. It kept people from asking questions I wasn't ready to answer, even to myself. That night, I logged into the business banking portal from my study at home, something I hadn't done in over a year because Caleb managed the day-to-day. Donna was watching television down the hall. I could hear the low murmur of some crime show, ironic in hindsight. 4 wire transfers. March 14th, $9,500. April 2nd, $11,200. April 30th, $8,800. May 19th, $11,500. All going to an account under Ferris Industrial Solutions LLC. I searched the company, registered in Delaware 8 months earlier, no website, no listed employees on LinkedIn. Registered agent was a law office that specialized in setting up shell companies for exactly $150 a pop. I sat there a long time. The clock on my desk read 11:47 p.m. I remember that specifically because I kept staring at it, watching the minutes change, like time itself might rearrange the numbers into something less ugly. Then I found the second thing, a credit check I hadn't authorized, run against my personal name, dated 3 weeks earlier. Someone had been checking whether I was still creditworthy enough to co-sign something. I hadn't co-signed anything. I called Marlene the next morning and asked her, casually, whether Caleb had mentioned refinancing anything lately. She said yes. He'd mentioned wanting to expand into a second facility in Angola, Indiana, and had asked her, off the record, what my personal debt-to-income situation looked like, in case they needed a guarantor. That's when the internal monologue started, the one I'd carry with me for the next 4 months. He's not just taking money, he's positioning himself to take more, with my name still attached to the risk, and my signature nowhere near the reward. I kept my face perfectly still that whole week at the shop, but inside, everything had already rearranged itself. I didn't confront him, not that week, not the next. Donna noticed something was wrong before I said a word. 38 years of marriage does that to a person, makes you fluent in each other's silences. I told her the truth on a Tuesday night over dinner, plates barely touched, and she set her fork down so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "You're going to sit on this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to understand it first," I told her. "Then I'll decide what to do with it." That became the plan, if you could call it a plan yet. I started paying attention the way I used to pay attention when I was building this business from nothing, noticing everything, saying almost nothing. I reviewed every wire transfer going back 2 years, not just the recent ones. I found smaller discrepancies I'd missed. A consulting invoice paid to a firm that shared an address with Priya's sister's apartment. A training seminar in Chicago that coincided with a weekend Caleb had told me he was visiting Priya's parents in Michigan. The pattern wasn't sloppy, it was patient, small enough to explain away individually, large enough to add up to real money over time. And then, 3 weeks into my silence, Caleb handed me the evidence himself, without knowing it. He came into my office on a Thursday afternoon, relaxed, coffee in hand, and told me he wanted to talk about restructuring the ownership percentages to reflect his increased operational contribution. He suggested it casually, like he was asking about a schedule change. He said Priya's father, a retired attorney, had drafted some language we could look at, whenever it was convenient. I told him I'd think about it. He smiled, said, "Take your time, Uncle Walt," and left a manila folder on my desk containing the draft agreement, 22% equity transfer, structured through an entity called Ferris Industrial Solutions LLC. There it was. The shell company wasn't just receiving stolen wire transfers. It was the vehicle he intended to use to formally take a piece of the company I'd spent 3 decades building, and he'd handed me the paperwork proving it, sealed with his own signature, sitting right there in a folder on my desk. I closed the folder, I thanked him for his initiative, and I started making calls that evening. The first call was to Doreen Ashford, a forensic accountant I'd used once, years earlier, during a supplier dispute. She remembered me. I told her what I'd found, and she asked one question that told me everything about how this would go. "Do you want to fix a mistake, Walter, or do you want to prove a pattern?" I told her the pattern. She told me to give her 90 days and full access to 6 years of records, and to say absolutely nothing to Caleb in the meantime. The second call was to my attorney, Sam Okafor, who I'd used for every major contract the shop had signed since 2004. Sam listened without interrupting, then said something I've never forgotten. "The people who steal from family always assume the family won't check. Don't prove them right by waiting too long, and don't prove them right by moving too fast either." Over the following 2 months, Doreen built a timeline that would have made a district attorney weep with joy. 14 separate transfers over 18 months, totaling $127,400, funneled through Ferris Industrial Solutions, and 2 smaller accounts, registered under variations of Caleb's middle name. The credit check, the equity restructuring draft, an email, recovered from the company server's backup. Caleb had used his work account, careless in a way only comfortable people are, describing his plan to gradually formalize control before Walt gets too old to fight it. I read that line 3 times. Gradually formalize control before Walt gets too old to fight it. 61 isn't old, but I understood, reading it, that in Caleb's calculation, I already was. Sam drew up the framework quietly, a plan that would use Caleb's own paperwork against him. The equity agreement he'd drafted required my signature to take effect. It also, buried in Section 14, gave the company the right to audit any entity that had received payments from Reyes Precision Tooling within the prior 3 years. He'd written his own trapdoor and hadn't noticed. Meanwhile, Caleb kept operating like nothing had changed. He closed a new supplier deal that month, took Priya to Charleston for their anniversary, mentioned twice more, always lightly, that he was still waiting to hear my thoughts on the restructuring. There was one close call. Marlene mentioned to him, in an unrelated conversation about tax prep, that Doreen Ashford had requested 6 years of wire logs. Caleb asked her why. Marlene, God bless her steady nerves, said she assumed it was routine year-end review. He let it go, but I felt the ground shift a little that week, knowing how close the whole thing had come to unraveling before it was ready. The plan needed 3 moves, each closing a door before Caleb realized the room was emptying around him. The first move was simple. I told Caleb I'd reviewed the equity proposal and wanted to move forward, but that any restructuring required a full audit of all entities that had done business with the company in the past 3 years. Standard due diligence, nothing personal. Section 14, his own clause. He agreed immediately, confident, because he believed Ferris Industrial Solutions was clean enough to survive a glance. The second move involved Halbrook Aerospace, our biggest client, the one Caleb had saved years earlier, with that Sunday flight to Cincinnati. I met privately with their VP of procurement, a man named Greg Tillman who'd known me for a decade, and told him I was restructuring internal financial controls. I asked, casually, whether Halbrook had ever paid any invoices related to a Ferris Industrial Solutions. Tillman checked his system. They hadn't. But he mentioned something useful. Caleb had recently asked him, off the record, whether Halbrook might be open to a side consulting arrangement once Caleb had more ownership stake in Reyes Precision. Tillman had found it strange enough to remember. That was the second piece of leverage. Caleb wasn't just draining the company, he was already shopping his future equity to our biggest client before he owned a single share of it. The third move was the audit itself, which Doreen conducted formally, with a letter on her firm's letterhead requesting documentation from Ferris Industrial Solutions LLC directly. Caleb, still confident, provided a folder of invoices that Doreen later proved were backdated, created within the same week, using a template with metadata timestamps that gave away the whole fabrication. I remember sitting in Sam's office reviewing the metadata report, and for one unguarded moment, I felt something close to grief instead of anger. He's not just stealing, he built an entire fictional business to justify it, and he did the work sloppily enough that a machine caught what 6 years of family loyalty never let me see. By the time the audit closed, every escape route had a lock on it. Halbrook wouldn't back a side deal with a man who couldn't produce clean books. The equity agreement Caleb had drafted now worked against him instead of for him, and Doreen's report sat ready, time-stamped, notarized, in a folder Sam kept in his office safe. I scheduled the meeting for a Tuesday morning, in Sam's conference room instead of my office, which alone should have told Caleb something was different. I told him it was to finalize the restructuring paperwork. Priya's father, the retired attorney, joined by phone, cheerful, expecting a formality. Doreen sat at the far end of the table with a closed folder in front of her. Sam sat beside me. I said very little as everyone settled in, and I noticed Caleb clock the quiet, the way a man notices a room's temperature drop before he understands why. Before we sign anything, I said, I want to walk through the audit results with everyone here. I watched his face when Doreen opened the folder. Doreen laid it out with the flat, unbothered precision of someone reading a weather report. 14 transfers, $127,400. The shell company's Delaware filing date, 8 months before the first payment. The backdated invoices, their metadata printed in bold at the bottom of each exhibit. The credit check run without authorization. The email, gradually formalize control before Walt gets too old to fight it, projected onto the wall behind her. Caleb's face went through 3 stages in about 90 seconds. First confusion, genuine looking, the kind he'd probably used before on people less prepared than me. Then a flicker of calculation, like he was still searching for an angle. Then something closer to the truth, which looked a lot like fear. Uncle Walt, I can explain the timing on some of this. Explain the metadata, Sam said, not unkindly. Explain why an invoice dated March 14th was created in a template file last Thursday. Caleb's father-in-law, still on speakerphone, went very quiet. It was a loan, Caleb said finally. I was going to pay it back before you even noticed. You had signing authority up to $50,000, I said. You didn't need to hide a loan. You hid this because you knew it wasn't one. He tried 3 more angles over the next 20 minutes. That I'd always been too controlling with the business. That Priya's medical bills after a difficult pregnancy had put pressure on him he never told me about. That this was really about proving himself instead of always being Walt's nephew in every room he entered. Some of it might have even been partly true. None of it explained the shell company, the backdated invoices, or the pitch to Halbrook before he owned a single share. I let him talk. I'd anticipated most of it. When he finished, I slid one final document across the table, a formal notice terminating his employment for cause, effective immediately, along with a civil demand for restitution of $127,400, and a note that the company reserved the right to pursue criminal referral depending on how quickly restitution was made. You have 90 days, I said, before this goes to the prosecutor's office instead of a spreadsheet. Caleb didn't fight the restitution demand once Sam made clear the alternative. He and Priya sold their house in Arboit Township within 6 weeks, a property they'd bought 2 years earlier with a down payment that, Doreen later confirmed, traced partly back to one of those 14 transfers. He liquidated a retirement account early, ate the penalty, and paid the full $127,400 into an escrow account Sam controlled. Halbrook Aerospace quietly ended all informal contact with him once Tillman heard, secondhand through me, how the side consulting arrangement pitch had actually originated. Word travels fast in a manufacturing town this size. 2 other clients who'd known Caleb professionally stopped returning his calls within the month, not because I asked them to, but because small business communities talk, and nobody wants to be the next name on someone's spreadsheet. Priya's father, humiliated at having drafted the equity agreement without asking harder questions, stepped back from handling any more of their legal matters. Priya herself called Donna once, crying, asking if there was any way to fix things. Donna told her gently that some things aren't fixed, they're rebuilt, and rebuilding takes years neither of us could hand over for free anymore. I didn't pursue criminal charges. Not out of forgiveness exactly, more because Donna asked me not to, and because some part of me still remembered a 14-year-old boy crying at his mother's funeral, and I couldn't fully separate that boy from the man who'd tried to take everything I built. But I made sure every professional door that mattered in this region knew exactly why Caleb Reyes no longer worked at Reyes Precision Tooling. The college fund for his daughter I left untouched. Some debts aren't hers to inherit. The shop is doing better than it ever has. We opened that second facility in Angola after all, legitimately, funded by Reyes Precision's own retained earnings, run by a tie-in operations manager I hired the old-fashioned way, through a 6-month probation period and background checks I should have run on family a long time ago. Caleb works in logistics now for a distributor 2 counties over. I hear he's decent at it. I hope that's true. I don't wish him ruin. I wish him the long, slow work of becoming someone whose name means something again, the way mine did after 34 years of showing up and doing the unglamorous thing correctly, over and over, until people stopped needing to check. Donna and I had dinner with Priya and their daughter last spring, careful and a little formal, but real. Caleb wasn't there. That's still its own kind of unfinished business, and maybe it always will be. Here's what I took from all of it, if you're looking for the lesson. Trust isn't the opposite of vigilance. I used to think it was, that checking on someone meant you didn't really trust them. I was wrong. The people worth trusting are the ones who'd want you to check, because they've got nothing to hide from the accounting. Everyone else is just hoping you love them too much to look. If someone in your life has ever made you feel like asking questions was the real betrayal, I'd like to know how you handled it. Write it in the comments below. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing for more stories like it every week, and let me know which chapter hit hardest. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.